All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Before I call us to order, I'm going to turn things over to Chief General Counsel Joe Reynolds for a little bit of a program note.
Thank you, Chancellor Rose. Joe Reynolds, NSHE Chief Legal Counsel. I just would like to state on the record and for everyone on the task force and who's listening that it's been our legal advice that Chancellor Rose act as the presiding officer for the preliminary portion of this first task force meeting until the task force makes a decision to elect a chair and a vice chair. And so that she'll facilitate these first agenda items. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. If you haven't met me before, my name is Melody Rose, and I am very privileged to be the Chancellor of the Nevada System of Higher Education. And it's really my great pleasure to welcome all of you here today and to call to order the inaugural meeting of the Task Force on Sexual Misconduct. I also want to acknowledge the presence of Assemblywoman Selena Torres, and shortly we will also be joined by Senator Melanie Scheibel. Both of these women were instrumental in bringing this legislation to fruition, and I recall very keenly that that was very much a team effort, and there were a lot of experts and voices included, and I think all who participated in bringing us to this point. Thank you so much to our legislators for spearheading the efforts to pass SB 347, and thank you for your attendance today. Members of the public may access meeting materials and this committee's activities via the NSHE website at www.nshe.nevada.edu. For those desiring to follow this committee's work ongoing, I encourage you to subscribe to the meeting notices on the NSHE website. To subscribe, please locate the Leadership and Policy tab on the homepage. From there, click on the Meeting Archive, Agendas, Minutes, and Media tab, then click on the Subscribe hyperlink. Currently, there is no way to subscribe only to this committee's notifications. Therefore, by subscribing through the process I just detailed, you will be subscribing to all updates and notifications from NSHE and the Board of Regents committee activities. I would also like to express my deep appreciation to the NSHE SCS team for providing logistical and technical support today. They've been hard at work today, and we appreciate them. And also a thanks to the Board of Regents for allowing us to use this meeting space for this purpose today. Next, we will have roll call. And for that, I turn to Deputy General Counsel Tina Russum. Will you please call the roll?
Good afternoon, members of the task force, and thank you, Dr. Rose. Members of the committee, if you can please indicate your presence when I call your name. Dr. Kavita Bacha. Yes. Kristen DeMay. Kristen DeMay. Maria Duce-Pree.
Present.
Dr. Tabor Griswold.
Present.
Dr. Elizabeth Gunn. Present. Zachary Jonigan.
Present.
Dr. Allison Netsky. Leslie Ramirez.
Present.
Joseph Reynolds.
Here.
Dr. Melody Rose.
Present.
Michelle Sposito. And Gwen Thompson.
Present.
You do have a quorum.
Thank you, Deputy Russum. We will now move to the first agenda item, which is the call for public comment. Deputy General Counsel Russum, will you please call for public comment?
Yes, thank you. At this portion of the agenda, members of the public are invited to provide public comment to the task force. Comments may be prohibited if the content of that comment is a topic that is not relevant to or within the authority of the committee, or if the content is willfully disruptive of the meeting by being irrelevant, repetitious, slanderous, offensive, inflammatory, irrational, or amounting to personal attacks or interfering with the right of other speakers. As a reminder, during this agenda item, no action may be taken on any matter raised until that matter is included on an agenda as an item for which action may be taken. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person, and persons providing public comment are asked to please begin by stating their name and spelling their last name for the record. Is there any public comment here in Las Vegas?
Hello, everyone. My name is Karen Yap. That is YAP for the record. And I serve as the current student body president for CISA and UNLV's undergraduate student government. And as of 10 minutes ago, I have officially notified the start of an investigation with the Office of Equal Employment in Title IX at UNLV. If I'm being honest with myself, this office saved my life. During the first part of my term, between celebrating campus events like UNLV Homecoming or passing student legislation to fund varying campus entities, in the middle of the day, I'd sit through Title IX intake meetings, care center meetings as a survivor, CAPS meetings for my trauma counseling. I ended my semester burnt out with accommodations to help with my absences, failed exams, and a lack of empathy by some of my peers. I express this not for pity or sympathy, but to reinforce to every member of this committee how crucial this task force is. The system doesn't work for everyone and has major holes that this body hopes to fill. It took me 4 months to speak up. I was able to be contacted with resources the day I spoke to a trusted faculty member, but for most, it takes weeks, even months. Sexual violence has affected my friends, my classmates, my peers, and myself in ways I couldn't comprehend before. My story took place with someone I worked with and was supposed to trust. Sexual misconduct doesn't just hurt our constituents, it may be deeply hurting the person right next to you, or the person watching this live stream, or the person leading your school. Thank you to Senator Scheibel, Assemblyman Flores, and Assemblywoman Torres for Senate Bill number 347, and thank you to the members of this body for sitting here ready to fulfill the mission of this legislation with climate surveys and additional steps to the grievance process. I also strongly urge this task force to consider a UNLV undergraduate representative to serve in the future. If the efforts of this task force stick true to its mission, it has the capacity to save a life, like the resources and friends at UNLV saved mine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any additional public comment in Las Vegas? Is there any public comment in Reno?
Yes. The podium. There you go.
Wonderful. Good afternoon, everyone. For the record, my name is Serena Evans, spelled E-V-A-N-S. I'm the policy coordinator for the Nevada Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence. I'm thrilled to be here with you all today. During the 2021 legislative session, we at the Coalition, along with many other passionate organizations and collaborators, worked closely with Senator Scheibel and Assemblywoman Torres to advocate for the passage of Senate Bill 347. Senate Bill 347 really was a labor of love, and seeing elements of the bill come to fruition with the creation of this task force is exciting. As many of you know, 1 in 5 women and 1 in 16 men are sexually assaulted while in college, and 32% of college students report experiencing dating violence by a previous partner. Per capita, college-aged women have the highest rate of intimate partner violence. With such a high prevalence, it is imperative that our higher education system prioritize prevention and appropriate interventions. The creation of this task force is long overdue, but we are confident that it will have a positive and lasting impact for victim survivors on higher education campuses throughout the state. We encourage the members of this task force to hold the needs of victim survivors in your forefront and approach everything you do with a trauma-informed lens. The Nevada Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence is here as a resource for you all, and we look forward to working with this task force as it develops. As a survivor of campus sexual assault here in Nevada, I know the positive impact that this task force has the potential to create. We are here to support you and hope that you all, as task force members, hold the Nevada system of higher education accountable for centering the needs of our community's victim survivors. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, task force members. My name is Abby Pike, that's P-I-K-E for the record, and I'm the current state director for Every Voice. The Every Voice Coalition is a student-led organization dedicated to ending sexual violence on college campuses across the country. The Nevada Every Voice team worked closely with Senator Melanie Scheibel and Assemblywoman Selena Torres to write and pass Senate Bill 347, the reason that we are all here today. I am thrilled to see such an experienced and passionate group of people here, and I hope to work closely with this task force to continue to improve safety and security on Nevada's campuses. Please do not hesitate to reach out to me and the Every Voice team if you need any assistance or want more student perspective. I am also here today representing almost 42,000 students who support fully enforcing all of the provisions in Senate Bill 347. The Associated Students of the University of Nevada, Reno, and the Consolidated Students of the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, each recently passed Senate resolutions in favor of full implementation of the law. Nevada students are anxiously awaiting the creation of a climate survey to better understand the situation that we are facing on our campuses every day. We also look forward to seeing the implementation of the remaining provisions in Senate Bill 347. I look forward to a brighter future for Nevada's students, and I'm grateful to everyone here today for standing up and playing a part in changing the status quo. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any further public comment in Reno?
No other public comment in Reno.
Thank you. And I will note for the record that there was no public comment submitted through voicemail or through our online portal. And with that, that concludes public comment at this time.
Thank you, Deputy Russum. And I'm moving on now to agenda item number 2. Again, I want to give my personal thanks to all of you for joining this afternoon to begin our conversations about a vitally important and deeply personal topic, sexual misconduct. This task force was created by Senate Bill 347 of the 81st legislative session. The bill was passed by the legislature and signed into law by Governor Sisolak in response to calls from NSHE students seeking more transparency and additional input into existing sexual misconduct measures on NSHE campuses. Following the passage of SB 347, the Board of Regents updated Title IV, Chapter 8, Section 13, and appointed members to this task force. As we all know, sexual misconduct impedes and negatively and oftentimes lastingly impacts individual progress and society as a whole. It also has specific and sometimes lasting impacts on students pursuing their higher education and becomes a barrier to their access as well as to their successful completion. And I believe, as your chancellor, that it is our solemn responsibility as leaders in this space to work intentionally and diligently to provide everyone within our community with an environment free from sexual misconduct. As your chancellor, this topic is also deeply important to me and has been a point of focus throughout my career. As a scholar in this field, and more importantly, the mother of 2 college-aged students, this work is deeply personal. It is my privilege to be a member of this task force and to be a part of NSHE's continued efforts to increase transparency, inclusion, and safety on our campuses. I will now turn the time over to Assemblywoman Torres and invite her to come to the podium to share some opening remarks that she may have for this task force. Assemblywoman Torres, we're really grateful for the work that you have done to bring us here today and glad that you could be with us to provide us with your perspective as we begin our work.
Okay, it's on. Perfect. This is different than the mics that we have in Carson City. For the record, my name is Assemblywoman Selena Torres, and I proudly represent Assembly District 3, which is right here in the heart of Las Vegas, Nevada. And I'm honored to be invited to speak to this task force to provide some introductory remarks and provide some of the background information that really covers how this legislation came to be. Before I dive into the challenging and very personal work that this task force will discuss, I want to provide some of the history and how this conversation started. Time and time again, as a friend, as a student, as an educator, and as a legislator, I've heard from survivors that are too scared to come forward in a system that does not encourage coming forward after an act of sexual misconduct. Unfortunately, many of whom don't know where they can go to receive additional resources and services here in our NSHE institutions, and they don't know where to go so that they can receive appropriate guidance. Unfortunately, many of our NSHE faculty and staff don't know what guidance to give our students. And sometimes they inadvertently discourage their students from coming forward. In the 2019 legislative session, the Interim Legislative Committee on Education was directed to conduct a study on ways to create a safe and respectful learning environment on our educational system at all levels. Although the pandemic shutdown in 2020 interfered with the general and usual process that we see with legislative studies, the Interim Education Committee was successful in engaging the key stakeholders and representatives from all points of view conducting the study. The study identified the area of greatest concern as sexual harassment and violence based on gender discrimination, including that based on sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. Sadly, LGBTQ students and students of color are especially vulnerable to harassment and violence on our campuses. In a nutshell, the 2020 study demonstrated the need for understanding the scope of the problem, uniform policies on sexual misconduct, better use of community resources in coordination with our local law enforcement agencies, providing more support to victims and other involved parties on our campuses, and expanded training and awareness for personnel and students. For far too long, issues around sexual harassment have been swept under the rug. For far too long, survivors have been told to keep quiet or risk losing their job, or their scholarship, or their integrity. Nevada won't stand for sexual harassment or misconduct. This task force is an opportunity for us to be responsive to data and ensure that we are having those critical conversations around the topic of sexual misconduct as they occur. Unfortunately, most survivors of sexual misconduct don't report to an official authority. The implementation and evaluation of a climate survey will give us the opportunity to identify gaps in services throughout our institutions. Climate surveys show the NSHE community that Nevada takes sexual misconduct seriously and has a deepened commitment to combating sexual misconduct in our community. The establishment of this task force is an opportunity for this community to have difficult conversations around how to address misconduct at our institutions within the system. Throughout the legislative session, Senator Scheibel and I worked hand in hand with student organizations, institutions, service providers, and the NSHE system to lay the foundation of this bill, many of whom are fortunate enough to be in the room today. I'm hopeful that this task force, in collaboration with subject matter experts, survivors, and community advocates, will provide recommendations that'll make a better Nevada for all. This is an opportunity for Nevada to be a leader, to evaluate the data on sexual misconduct on college campuses, and to take action when evaluating that data. I look forward to witnessing the work accomplished by this task force and playing a hand at the legislature when necessary. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Assemblywoman Torres. We're honored to have you with us today, and we're grateful for your remarks as we get started on this important work. And with that, I would like to invite Senator Scheibel to the podium. We're equally grateful for your presence and for the work that you did to ensure our activities here today. And we invite you to share any thoughts with us that you would like as we get started on this work.
Well, thank you so much. And I am delighted to be here. I'm honored that you've asked me to give some opening remarks, and I'll try to keep them relatively brief because I think that you all know the importance of this task force and of the work that we're doing here. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here today. But I will just shed a little bit of perspective on how I came to be involved in this project and why I decided to take it on. And I think that today is a perfect example to demonstrate that. You may have noticed I walked in the room a few moments late, and I'm not sure if my message was relayed to you, but in my day job, I am a prosecutor at the DA's office. I'm off the clock right now. This is my lunch hour. But I started this morning at 10 a.m. interviewing a victim of a sexual assault. And by 11:30 this morning, I had her on the stand giving direct testimony about not one, not two, but 11 counts of sexual assault that she just endured last week. And I was in court until about 1:15, arguing the case to make sure that the offender would be held to answer and be set for a jury trial in the 8th Judicial District. That is how I spent my morning with a single mom who was raped by somebody who she knows, who she trusts, and who she thought was someone that she could depend on. And it just reminded me that we all know that sexual violence doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't start one day in one place at one time, but these patterns are reinforced over time. And all of us play a part in preventing sexual violence and responding to it when we see it. And so I hope, and I know, that this committee is going to work with the students at all of NSHE's institutions to try to prevent 2 more people from becoming a perpetrator and becoming a victim of sexual violence so that we can have just a couple fewer of those conversations. And when I first heard about this bill, it was brought to me by a group called the Every Voice Coalition. They're a group of college students in the United States with students here at UNR and UNLV who are really passionate about this legislation. And initially, I'll be honest, when they told me they wanted to form a task force, I wasn't sure that we needed another bureaucracy to talk about problems without solving them. But the students assured me that this is the path forward, and that's why I'm so excited about this task force, that it is not a top-down approach where talking heads are going to tell students what they should do and when and why and how, but this has been organically created through a group of students, through Assemblywoman Torres and myself, who all came together and asked the community, what support do you need? What representation do you need? What conversation do you want to have and with whom? And that's how this task force was created, was to be responsive to the needs of students. And that is what I am sure it is going to do as it continues to identify areas where NSHE institutions can be more receptive, more responsive, more proactive, and continue the good work that they're already doing, and uplift the voices of students who are so passionate, so prepared, and so willing to roll up their sleeves and get to work making their campuses safe places for everybody to live, learn, work, and enjoy being a student, being a member of the staff, being a part of a larger community. So I want to thank all of you for your time here today and everybody who has tuned in as well. I know that it really does take a large group of people who care a whole lot about an issue to make a dent in something as serious and as pervasive as sexual violence. And I'm excited that we are taking a step in that direction. And I look forward to working with you in order to continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Scheibel, and we thank you for the work that you do in an ongoing way on this topic, and grateful that you could spend your lunch hour with us. Thank you. So I will move on to agenda item number 3, which is information only. And as you are aware, as you've just heard our bill sponsors share with us, this task force is a tremendous opportunity to provide input and vision on how sexual misconduct is currently being addressed and how it ought to be addressed by NSHE and its institutions. And since some of us have not previously worked with one another or known one another, had the opportunity to meet, I would like for us all to take that moment now to introduce ourselves. So members of the committee, whether you're in the room or with us virtually, when called upon, I would ask that you tell us who you are and share any brief opening remarks you'd like to share with the audience about what brings you to this work. And I'm going to run through the list of our friends and colleagues with us today, and I'll begin with Dr. Batra.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. My name is Kavita Batra, and I work as a statistician with the School of Medicine at UNLV. I provide statistical and research guidance to UNLV faculty, residents, students. So I'm honored to be a part of this team, and I do think that it is critical to promote safe environment for the students and faculty where we all can grow and do our progress in our respective fields. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Batra. And now I will move to Kristen DeMay with TMCC.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hold the button down.
Okay, great. My name is Kristen DeMay. I'm a counselor at TMCC. I've been there since 2006. I love my job, and I've worked with several students who have experienced sexual violence, and we had a really positive time going through the Title IX session and helping in that realm. So I just look forward to finding out what more can we do.
Thank you very much for your introduction, and thank you for serving. I'll move next to Marie Doucet-Perry at UNR.
Aloha, I'm Maria DeSaiferi. I'm the Director of Equal Opportunity and Title IX at the University of Nevada, Reno. Obviously, this is what we do. Our office dedicates our time to reaching out to students, to working with our faculty members and our community at large. And so we're always eager to unite because it's not enough to have a few people, taking on this issue. It really is a community concern. And it takes the community kind of collaborating together. So obviously, we're happy to be here doing our part.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate your time and effort with us. And next, I'll turn to Dr. Tabor Griswold.
Hello, my name is Dr. Tabor Griswold, and I have a background that was in both the private industry and then the last almost 20 years in academia. My interest in participating in the task force is because of having been in information technologies. That gave me the background to work towards my PhD, and I actually am a data nerd. And part of that is surveying, and I think my skill set is the main reason why I was nominated to come to this group. However, working for 3 private companies and the university, I am very much aware of the subtleties of what goes on in the workplace. Some are overt and can be dealt with in a few ways. However, if you are in your 20s and you don't know this skill set, it is extremely easy to be sandbagged, just be honest. And I think I bring that here because I think when we start talking about questions on how people have to deal with their fellow employees, friends, and other experiences, it's not easy. And I like to think that it's an honor in being on the task force to be able to bring my particular analytical data set to building a way of collecting the information and then dispersing it that will help educate and inform that people can understand in what's much more simplistic terms, something that is really rather complicated and causes a lot of emotional and traumatic issues. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Griswold. It's nice to meet you. And I'll turn next to Dr. Elizabeth Gunn from NSHE.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Chancellor Rose, for the opportunity to serve on this task force, and good afternoon to fellow task force members. It's a pleasure to be working with you on this important initiative. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Gunn, Dean of the School of Liberal Arts and Sciences at Nevada State, and I have been in the awe-inspiring and beautiful state of Nevada for a little over a year. I join you from Rutgers University in New Jersey, and I could not be more delighted to be with the NSHE system. I'm especially appreciative to those that brought this important bill to fruition, and I bring 25 years of professional experience and background in women and gender studies to this initiative. So I look forward to working with you all for important and lasting change. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gunn. And next, I will turn things over to President Zachary Johnigan, Student Body President at CSN, who joins us virtually.
Yes, thank you, Chancellor Rose, and thank you, members of the task force. My name is Zachary Johnigan, a student at the College of Southern Nevada, and also serving as the current student body president, representing the 30,000 students here at the College of Southern Nevada. I'm honored to be nominated to be a part of this task force, and I'm hoping that during this task force, I can use my voice in our advocacy efforts to make sure that we bring whatever we work on here to the College of Southern Nevada. I understand that our college is focused on being proactive versus reactive in our policies that empower our students and communities to achieve, succeed, and prosper. And I'm hoping that I can use my student voice in those efforts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Johnigan. And I'll turn now to Dr. Netsky, professor at UNLV.
Good afternoon. So I am a psychiatrist at the Kirk-Kerkorian School of Medicine at UNLV, and I serve as the department chair and the interim vice dean of clinical affairs. I feel fortunate that I am a native to Nevada. I have had the opportunity to go to school at UNR. I also have served on the faculty at UNR and have been on the faculty at UNLV since we opened the medical school in 2017. The institutions across our state are so pivotal as stepping stones for the people in our community to achieve, succeed, and develop our economy, that it's pivotal that we have a safe and fair environment, not only for our employees, but for our students and everybody who falls in between. I've been a career-long advocate for mental health and all things related to that, and I really see these really going hand in hand as far as how they impact people in the long term, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Netsky. I'll turn things over now to ASUN Senator Leslie Ramirez, who I believe joins us remotely.
Hi, I'm not sure where to look, sorry. I'm Leslie Ramirez. I'm currently a senator for the College of Business. I am also Delta Gamma sister, so I am a sorority woman. I'm super excited to be here today and be in the presence of such professional and educated women and individuals. And I'm so excited to just learn from you all, and as well as, provide that student voice and representation. I am excited again, as a person of color, as a woman, being able to speak up for any minority, any woman, anyone that's marginalized. I'm really honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us. And now I'll turn things to my colleague, Mr. Reynolds.
Hi, everybody. My name is Joe Reynolds, and I'm the Chief Legal Counsel for NSHE, which in short means that I oversee all the legal affairs for NSHE system-wide, as well as all our 8 institutions. On a professional note, most of my career has been involved with law enforcement and education. Prior to my current position, I was the Chief Counsel for the Nevada Department of Public Safety, as well as the Nevada Department of Corrections. And before that was also a senior prosecutor in Lyon County. And unfortunately, the vast majority of cases I prosecuted were sex crimes against women and children, as well as domestic violence crimes. And on a personal note, I'm also the father of 2 children who are in NSHE. One is a freshman living in the dorms, and I'm a product of NSHE myself. And so this is something both professionally and personally is passionate for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe. Now I'll turn to Michelle Sposito.
Hello, everyone. I am Michelle Sposito. I am the director of the Office of Equal Employment in Title IX at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. So this work is something that I do on a daily basis. It's obviously very important to me, and I'm excited for the opportunity to collaborate with all of you.
Thank you very much. And last but certainly not least, Gwendolyn Thompson, please.
Ms. Thompson, can you please turn your microphone on? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Gwendolyn Thompson. I am the confidential campus advocate. I support UNR, WNC, and TMCC faculty and students. I've been a confidential sexual assault advocate for over 4 years. This is something I'm incredibly passionate about. I'll say that about 50 hours a week, I'm supporting students that have been through sexual violence or sexual misconduct. It's something I'm very much in the trenches of. I hear their concerns, I hear their successes too, and I'm very happy that I get to be here to hopefully support our community and support survivors in feeling safe. So thank you for having me.
Well, thank you, everyone, members of the task force, for sharing a little bit about yourselves. I am really touched by the depth of experience and the breadth of skills that we bring into this group. I also know that there are many more individuals who will be participating in one way or another in our activities over the months and years to come, who will also bring additional resources and additional perspective over time, and I expect we'll come to know one another quite well over the course of our work. So thank you for letting us get going on that relationship development. As this committee moves forward, the charge of the task force as provided in Senate Bill 347 will guide our work. And therefore, I would like to turn to my colleague again, Mr. Reynolds, to provide us with item number 4 on the agenda and an overview of Senate Bill 347.
Thank you, Chancellor Rose. Joe Reynolds for the record. And I'm just going to give a brief overview of Senate Bill 347. There's a lot there. It's 41 pages. It's very comprehensive. It's very thorough. And two main provisions that I wanted to bring to the task force attention regarding the charge of this task force specifically. One is the formation of the task force in Section 12 of the bill, and then also in Section 13, which really goes into some of the details of the climate survey. And as Senator Scheibel mentioned in her remarks, getting information at the ground level is what is really key in my understanding of Senate Bill 347. And we can do that through the climate survey. And based upon getting information from climate surveys can then inform the policy decisions and recommendations that this task force can make to both the Board of Regents as well as to the Nevada legislature on how to improve our policies, our procedures, and greater protections and accountability for victims of sexual misconduct. In Section 13, with respect to what should be in a climate survey, I was going to read some of these, I think, important points to kind of just lay the groundwork for what this task force will be looking at in the future as we start on that work. And along with the development, again, of a climate survey, at the end of the day, it's to use that information for both transparency, accountability, and improve the protections of our students within NSHE, as well as our employees and members of the public. And so under Section 13, one of the charges of the task force is to develop a climate survey on sexual misconduct designed to be administered at institutions within the system. Information-specific data needs to be fair and unbiased, be scientifically valid and reliable, meet the highest standards of survey research. As a part of the process also is there should be consultation with student government associations, consultation with persons with expertise in the development and use of climate surveys, provide opportunities for written comment from organizations that assist victims of sexual misconduct to ensure the adequacy and appropriateness of any proposed content of the climate survey, consult with institutions within the systems on strategies for optimizing the effectiveness of climate surveys on sexual misconduct, account for the diverse needs and differences of institutions. We have eight very unique campuses. And moving down on page 8 of the bill, to add a little bit more context, if a climate survey on sexual misconduct is developed, the climate survey must request information on topics related to sexual misconduct. They may include the estimated number of alleged incidents of sexual misconduct, both reported and not reported. In my opinion, the and not reported is extremely significant. Moving on down, when and where an alleged incident of sexual misconduct occurred, whether an alleged incident of sexual misconduct was perpetrated by a student, faculty member, staff member, or a third-party vendor, or even a member of the public. Awareness of student policies and procedures, whether a student reported an alleged incident of sexual misconduct, and if the incident was reported to which campus resource and law enforcement agency. If the incident was not reported, the reason the student chose not to report it, whether a student who reported an alleged incident of sexual misconduct was offered support, informed of campus, state, local resources, or informed of the prohibition against retaliation for reporting an alleged incident of sexual misconduct. I wasn't going to read all of them down the list. It's very comprehensive, but Again, as one of the charges of this task force is to ensure that all of those criteria that are set forth in SB 347 are represented in a climate survey. In my opinion, a survey that's intended to have be extraordinarily thorough, but also be reliable. And that also one of the charges of this task force is to balance two important, I think, interests. One is for transparency and accountability, and then at the same time to gather and protect confidential information and provide a safe place where victims of sexual misconduct can report the misconduct without fear of retaliation. And so we have to balance those competing interests as a task force, and then to do so while we are a public body that will be subject to the open meeting law. There are provisions, I believe wisely, within the bill that will allow for certain instances where we can hold meetings, especially to receive some very highly confidential information that won't be public. And with that, Chancellor, that's just a broad overview. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief General Counsel Reynolds. I really appreciate that high-level overview. I would like to pause, however, to see if there are any questions from committee members.
Hello, Chancellor, I have a question.
Yes, please, President Jonigan.
Thank you. Zachary Jonigan for the record. For Chief Joe Reynolds, I wanted to know, is this task force going to delegate a specific member to conduct these surveys, or are each of us to go to our respective institutions and conduct individual surveys?
Great, Joe Reynolds for the record. Great question. As I'm reading the language, is that the task force has the ability to make a recommendation to the Board of Regents to hire a researcher, one or more researchers, to help start with some of those research functions, and that also there is the ability of the task force to have a designated person system-wide, but then also a designated individuals at an institution level. And so, sorry that was a long answer, but the task force has the ability to make those recommendations, certainly to the Board of Regents to ultimately codify and entitle for our Title II of our handbook.
Okay, so perhaps as a item of new business, I believe Chancellor Rose will probably be making the recommendation to conduct the survey. Is that the action we're probably going to take?
Well, certainly later in the agenda this afternoon, we're going to have an open conversation about our thoughts about how to proceed with the survey. And I think that very issue that you raise around decentralization versus consistency across the system is a research methods question that I think we need to address, and I'm looking forward to that conversation. So I think you're ahead of us here today, Zachary, as usual. So thank you. Appreciate your thoughts. Any other questions or comments? Yes, please.
I just have one comment. So while when we reach at the point where we are deciding on the survey, so I think we should also decide whether we are using the validated instruments to have robust validity, reliability of the results that we are going to find, because those results will serve as baseline data for us to design targeted interventions. So that can be something we can discuss later on.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Other questions or comments for Mr. Reynolds? Okay. All right. Well, thank you all very much, and thank you, Mr. Reynolds, for providing that overview. We'll move now to agenda item number 5, and this is an agenda item to allow us to get a baseline understanding of what survey data are already available to us, where are our campuses in terms of survey research in this arena, and we'll turn to agenda item number 5 for information. So for agenda item number 5, we've invited each institution to share their most recent sex violence and data trends. DRI, for the record, has not received any sexual misconduct complaints in the past 5 years. Therefore, DRI does not have any additional data or trends to report to us today. So with that being said, we will now hear from the remainder of the NSHE institutions starting with UNLV. And I'd like to ask Dr. Margaret Campy to provide us with her overview.
Hi, Dr. Margaret Campy, CAMPE for the record. Well, these data that I'm about to share, so when I was approached to share some data around sexual violence, I obviously had more questions, which the research folks in the room will understand based on, whether that's going to be official statistics from Clery or whether that's our office statistics, whether that's self-report. And so just to bear in mind that the type and quality of data and reliability of data that you're going to get will very much depend on the source and the metrics and the definition by which we are talking about sexual violence. So official statistics, from Clery, UCR, NCVS, et cetera, those are going to be lower than self-report surveys such as the AAU Campus Climate Survey or others. There are a lot of campuses around the nation doing campus climate surveys. Campus climate surveys have been being done in some way, shape, or form since I think it was COS in like 1976 that did the first one. So there's a lot of data already out there, and there are a lot of best practices in terms of developing the metrics, and there are already a lot of validated measures for this type of survey. So that's great news for you all. So I think somebody already mentioned this, but we've got this 40+ years of research that shows that 20 to 25% of college females are assaulted over the course of their career. Research more recently is obviously, or not obviously, probably, maybe obvious to me, but maybe not to everybody. More recent research is showing those that occupy multiply marginalized identity characteristics are at even higher risk than college females. So what we also know is that most never report anywhere. Which is why this survey is important, which is why it's important to have confidential advocacy, all of that good stuff. So as far as data and trends go, I think this is kind of illuminating, right? I got with Michelle on some of this, and we spoke about, I am on the Clery slide. One forward, thank you. So we talked about the Clery statistics, and those are published every year in the campus, in the safety reports, and those are super important. And our office does work with the folks at Clery to report anonymous instances of sexual violence that meet the definition, the legal definition of rape and fondling and other crimes. However, what we've found is that often our students that come to us at the Care Center, and maybe I should back up for a second. I'm the director of the Care Center. The Care Center is a confidential advocacy office at UNLV. We've recently gotten a grant to expand services to CSN and NSHE, and I believe those MOUs are in the hands of presidents getting signed right now. So we are a source that students can come to, and we will give them information about all of their different resources. We will give every single student information, staff or faculty, on how to report sexual violence and other forms of power-based violence to Title IX or to police or any other official offices like the Office of Student Conduct that they may wish to do so. We also provide confidential advocacy resources, safety planning, accompaniment, an emergency fund, lots of different help getting accommodations through Michelle's office, lots of stuff like that. So sorry, I probably should have led with that. So that you all kind of know where I'm coming from with this. But you see our Clery statistics here, and it is showing that in 2020 we had 0 rapes on UNLV's main campus and the Shadow Lane campuses. And while that might look like a good number, all that means is that folks aren't reporting those to Police or Title IX and the statistics that go into Clery. So what I want to talk about next is we don't have like survey statistics from our office. We do have a client survey that we're sending out to all of our clients this year, but we don't have broad, representative population-based statistics for UNLV. Hopefully this campus climate survey will fix that for all of the institutions. But what I can talk about are the clients that come to see us. About 30% of our clients report sexual violence on average. We average approximately 150 clients per year, so that's about 45 or 50 clients that have experienced sexual violence. You look at the numbers at Clery and you look at those numbers, and those are a lot different. Also, we obviously don't get reports from every person that's experienced this, so those numbers are even higher than that. Just another thing that I would like to just point out, though, as well, is that there is an opportunity here to think about whether or not the survey should measure other types of power-based violence beyond sexual violence, right? There's some, in particular in Las Vegas and with really diverse populations and a lot of first-generation students and a lot of multi-generational households and things like that. Family violence, sexual violence, domestic violence, relationship abuse, those things happen sometimes concurrently, right? And so I think it's important to understand the scope of violence broader than just sexual misconduct. I'll leave that at that, but I think there's an opportunity here to learn more than just about sexual misconduct. So about 10 to 15% of our clients are stalking. That's what they come to us for. We have, and then the rest are going to be relationship abuse or family violence. Family violence has been a really, really big one, especially with the pandemic. We've seen those numbers go up and up and up, and it's something we don't know a lot about. The research doesn't have a lot of information out there on family violence for essentially like adult children that wouldn't qualify as vulnerable adults but have aged out of systems like Child Protective Services. So our clients, aligned with Southern Nevada, we have 68% of racial or ethnic minorities, 86% are women, 8% are men, 6% are gender non-binary or trans. 13.4% of our clients are homeless or housing insecure, 7.3% have a disability, 3.7% are immigrant or asylum seekers. And so those are a few little bits of data that I put together for this presentation. We have a lot of information. If you're interested specifically on other data points, I'd be happy to provide that, or interested in learning more about the Care Center and confidential advocacy, I'm also happy to provide that information at your request.
Thank you very much, Dr. Campy. Are there questions from the committee for Dr. Campy? And obviously, I think as your presentation anticipates, we're just doing the very briefest of overviews, and I think we can anticipate we'll have many more opportunities to go deeper into your work as this committee unfolds. Any questions at this stage? All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I'm sorry. I had
sorry.
a question. My apologies. Just a quick question.
And please identify yourself for the record.
Sorry, Zachary Johnigan, for the record. I wanted to know, could you define briefly, you mentioned power-based violence and that we should probably consider putting that in the survey. Could you define power-based violence?
Sure. So power-based violence is a term that we use as sort of an umbrella term to depart from interpersonal violence. That encompasses things like gender-based violence, sexual violence, relationship abuse, family violence, child abuse, things like that. It's an umbrella term, and we use it as opposed to interpersonal violence because interpersonal violence suggests that there is an interpersonal relationship between the victim survivor and the offender, which is not always the case, as we know.
Okay, that answers my question. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Dr. Campy? All right. Thank you very much again. I appreciate your time. Next, we'll move on to CSN, and we have Armin Asharian. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. If I'm not, please correct me. Dr. Asharian, maybe you can introduce yourself and provide us an overview from CSN.
Hello, my name is Armin Asharian. I am the Title IX coordinator and the director of the Office of Institutional Equity. We currently do not have a survey of this sort here at CSN. So the data that I have is from the Cleary report. And as was pointed out earlier, that is, it must be woefully underreported. And to give you an example of that, or just to explain that, if we look at the data for the last 3 years, 2018, 19, for 2018, 19, and 20, we see that there are no reported rapes on campus, only 2 fondling, nothing on incest, nothing on statutory rape, only 3 reports of dating violence in 2018, 2 domestic violence occurrences in 2020, and 1 case stalking in 2019. I think listening to that makes the case for why we want to have a survey taking place. It's clearly going to be, the data that we're getting is clearly insufficient and clearly underreported. And with that, I'll turn it back over.
Thank you very much, Dr. Asharian. Are there questions from the committee about the Cleary data that was presented from CSN? I would concur with your conclusion, Dr. Asharian, that those numbers suggest that we have work to do there. Thank you. Okay, seeing no questions, then we'll move on to GBC, where we have Patricia Anderson also appearing virtually. And I'll turn things over to you, Ms. Anderson, to talk with us about your numbers at GBC.
Thank you very much, Chancellor. And you're absolutely right. And actually, if you'll bear with me for just a couple of minutes here, I'll show you that we are fortunate enough to have done some climate surveys on the campus with regards to sexual violence and student safety. We did a round in 2017, again in 2019, and actually had put one together, and it's releasing this week for this year to see where we are given the changes of the campus and the pandemic and that type of thing. We have partnered for these surveys because we knew that the only way we would get truly comfortable and potentially honest answers was to not do the survey ourselves. And so we have partnered with the Nevada Center of Surveys, Evaluations, and Statistics at UNR to handle the survey with us. We've done it actually in partnership with Western because both of us being the smaller institutions within the system, it was kind of a way to use similar surveys for similar type of students, although they're not exactly the same and we serve certainly different portions of the state. It provided us a way to both be able to do some climate surveys in years when, quite honestly, you watch the budget, but quite factually, you're still very concerned about making sure your students feel safe. So if you could move that slide for us, because I don't know that I have control of it. Thank you. Sorry, just had a crisis at my desk. So the first thing you're going to see is the results of the climate survey, and this is just the highlights, certainly not all of the results. But this is from spring of 2017. It went out to all of our students. They were notified through the Web Campus Canvas system so that every student saw it, whether they were live students, whether they were online students, whether they were technical students. And it went to students throughout the state and throughout the country that took our classes. if they were enrolled for any 4 credit classes, they received this survey. And so the highlights of the 2017 survey were that most respondents strongly agreed with the statement that I feel safe at GBC, and that certainly encouraged us. That said, there were also comments and write-in answers that talked about lighting, talked about not seeing enough security and all of that, and we used those to address it and went on a major campaign to fix some of those things after this result. 8% reported having a friend or an acquaintance who was a victim of unwanted sexual experience. 3.6% believe they had witnessed a situation that could have led to a sexual assault, although it was not the assault in front of them. 11.4% reported experiencing or witnessing sexual harassment. More than 95% of the respondents reported that they had not experienced any forms of interpersonal violence while they were a student, and we were pleased to know that and hope that was an accurate number. 4.6% of the respondents reported being the victim of any form of unwanted sexual encounter while attending GBC. And I put a note in here just to keep that. Statistics are wonderful, but it's an economy of size when you're one of the smaller colleges. So note that because of the smaller number of students at GBC, the report itself, when we got it back from the survey, was that 4.6% people was 22 students out of the 4,000 some odd that we have. So one respondent did report that their sexual assault took place on campus. And I will say that as the investigator for Title IX under the Vice President for Student Services, we did investigate some sexual harassment. We did not investigate an actual assault. So even though it's in the survey, it never came to us. For 2019, it changed a little bit. Again, most respondents said that they felt safe at GBC, and that's all locations, not just the Elko location. Just over 8% reported having a friend or acquaintance who was a victim. 4.3% believed they had witnessed a situation that could lead to a sexual assault. 12.7%, and this went up a little bit, unfortunately, reported experiencing or witnessing sexual harassment. Most of the respondents reported they had not experienced any forms of interpersonal violence while they were a student at GBC. 7.9% of the respondents reported being the victim of any form of unwanted sexual encounter while attending GBC. And again, economy of numbers, this is a smaller number. That 7.9% actually was 11 students, given the number who answered the survey in that particular year. Most students reported their assault took place off of the campus, and 55% of those that reported having an assault or harassment reported that it occurred more than 2 years ago. So we take those climate surveys very seriously, and then we compare them with the basic information from our required Clery report. And you will see that in the Clery report, and I have combined all of the GBC physical locations for this statistical purpose, although when we file our Clery report, we file by location. So Winnemucca is separate from Elko and that type of thing. But you will see that there's a lot of zeros on this. And so based on what you just heard from the climate survey, I am happy to know that we are going to continue going down the climate survey road, because I believe it gives us much more information as to what we need to do. Incest and statutory rape were all zeros. And at the end, the stalking and dating violence, in 2019 on campus, there was 2 instances of stalking. In student housing, which is Elko campus only, there was 1 instance. And in 2017, there was 1 instance of stalking. So we're very fortunate to tell you that at least in both methods of reporting, GBC has been trying to track it and has been working to have surveys that we can make as anonymous as possible to the students. We do provide a place for them to add suggestions or comments that are not covered by the actual questions. And we will be more than happy if as the committee goes forward, if you want to have UNR's office pull our prior evaluations so you can actually see the questions and see what works and what doesn't, you're more than welcome to use those surveys. I'm sure that the Nevada Center for Statistics and Evaluations and Surveys would be more than happy to provide that to you. And that was really all I had for the opener. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to help.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Are there any questions from the committee?
Yes, this is Kavita Batra for the records. I just wanted to ask, first, I wanted to thank you for sharing your results. And I wanted to ask, what was the total number of students in 2017 and 19 means in terms of sample size who took the survey?
The sample size for 2017 was larger. And some of that has to do with, we had many more live classes in 2017. In 2019, we had kind of gone to slightly more online. So in 2017, we had approximately 1,800 students in round numbers responding to the survey. In 2019, we only had about 600 or 700 responding. And that's why statistically, we all know statistics, you have to be careful what's behind the statistics. And that's why when they give us the results, they don't just give us statistics, they give us the hard numbers so that we know what we're really talking about and what we need to do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other questions for GBZ? It looks
Yes,
like, yeah, please
I have
go
a
ahead.
question.
Mhm.
Once again, Zachary Jonigan for the record. Thank you, Chancellor Rose. And my question, of course, is for Director Anderson. I want to know, based off of how you all conducted your survey, would you recommend that we go to an outside source to conduct the survey or internal sources to conduct our own internal surveys?
I'm going to answer that with a yes and a no. The reason that we use the UNR office, which is kind of an independent office, is so that our students felt comfortable that they were not, because we're a small campus, it's unfortunately sometimes pretty easy to identify where, maybe not the person, but where they might be, which location they're at, whether they're at Winnemucca, Pahrump, or Elko, based on some of their handwritten comments. So if you use an independent group like this, even though they're inside NSHE, our students felt comfortable enough going this route to provide us some pretty viable information. And so I think if we use a group that's independent within NSHE, you're fine. Certainly using an outside group is the ultimate way to protect everybody and to make students feel the most comfortable. But in today's time, we also have to look at budget considerations. And so I know that I'm fairly certain UNR also has an office similar to this. And if we had surveys north and south run by those offices that are independent, where there's no names, there's no handwriting, there's nothing, it's all just data when you receive it back. I would hope that our students would have faith in that as a way to do it.
Okay, thank you, Director Anderson.
Absolutely, happy to.
Any other questions for Director Anderson this afternoon? Okay, seeing none, we'll move along to NSC, where we have Director of Human Resources and Title IX Coordinator Eric Gilliland. Are you there with us? Oh.
I am here with you.
Yes, you are
And
really here
Great
with
job
us.
on the last name. Thank you, I
Huh?
appreciate that.
You're
So,
welcome.
For the record, Eric Gilliland, Gilliland. Chancellor Rose and task force members, I appreciate the opportunity to be here in what I hope is going to be the first of many discussions that we get to have on this, and I say critical, and I mean critical topic. Been with NSHE for a little, coming up on 9 years, and I think this may be the first time that we've had this public task force or group to be able to address this, so definitely do appreciate it. You'll note that I don't have a visual presentation, and unfortunately it's because our numbers are such that I think you'll probably remember when I list them for you. We, per our Clery reporting, have one instance in 2018 of on-campus dating, violence, and stalking incident. There's no corresponding Title IX report In fact, I've been with NSC for 3 years, and we've had no Title IX complaints during that time, nor is there a record of any Title IX complaints prior to that. Say, unfortunately, with that, as you've heard, these cases are not reported at the level that we want them to be. And I'll share in my 12 years, every time I have a chance to talk, and for those of you that have been on meetings, Joe, you'll know, I usually like to talk. I love what I do, and I'm passionate about it. But I tell folks, I want numbers. I want to run these reports, and I want our numbers to skyrocket. And I'll get looks on their face like, what are you talking about? I tell them, our students, our stakeholders are facing these situations, but they're not reporting them to us. So I look forward to this task force and working with you to develop not only the survey, but I think some strategies for how we can, when I say create a culture of reporting on our campuses. It's got to go beyond just, yes, we want you to report. I think we need to embed it into who we are and create a space where our students, faculty, staff, and visitors not only report, but feel comfortable doing so and know that we will respond appropriately and provide the support to them. So again, I'll close with that. I look forward to working with each of you and my colleagues that we have been working together and moving this forward and making NSHE a safe and healthy place for learning and working. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And are there any questions for Mr. Gilliland? I'm sure at some point you will offer some suggestions around how to create the culture that we're looking for. And I think we'll all look forward to having that dialogue.
Most definitely. Thank you very much.
Thank you for making the effort to drive down. Appreciate it. All right, we will move along to TMCC where we have Kim Studebaker. Kim, are you with us? Interim Director Studebaker, are you there?
I am, sorry. I thought I was on the microphone and I wasn't. So for the record, Kim Studebaker, Studebaker. I'm encouraged about the task force being created and the results that will come out of this because I think it's really important to have the information in the climate survey and have a holistic understanding of what's happening at all of our campuses. But I also think it's equally important that we understand that resources are limited, especially with the smaller and medium-sized community colleges where, the human resources directors wear the Title IX hat and the ADA coordinator hat and all those things. So that being said, we have not conducted any climate surveys at TMCC that I'm aware of prior to me coming on board. The Title IX office was housed in the Equity and Inclusion office, and then it transferred over to HR. So when I say we're in planning stages, we've been in planning stages for quite some time. Next slide. And this is just a topic page, so we can skip this one as well. To the next slide, please. Thank you. Just real quickly about TMCC. We have 4 campuses. We serve about 25,000 students annually in credit and non-credit programs. We have 156 full-time faculty, 349 part-time faculty, 285 full-time staff and administrators. We're a designated Hispanic serving institution, and we do not have student housing, but we do have one athletic program, and that's in men and women's soccer. Next slide, please. When asked to provide sexual assault offenses and crime statistics, I rely on our Clery report and the annual security data that we receive from the university police system. And, again, fortunately, we're showing no statistics in these areas, but again, unfortunately, it's underreported and we're aware of that. We do provide prevention and response And we make efforts on our campuses for both employees and students with different platforms for training. We provide preventing sexual harassment and discrimination training through the Foundry platform. This is mandatory upon hire and every 2 years thereafter. And then we provide additional preventing sexual harassment training as needed and on occasion. On the student side, we offer sexual assault prevention for community colleges also through the Foundry platform. And this must be offered once a year, but we offer it every spring and fall semester. And then our student athletes are required to complete the online course where other students are offered it, not required. And let me go back to the employee training. That is mandatory training. And then within our own office, we are required to remain certified under Title IX, both as coordinators and investigators. And so that's some data on the next slide, just to show the ongoing efforts to remain up to date and trained in these areas. So I'll take questions now if there are any.
Does the committee have any questions for Ms. Studebaker? Okay, all right, seeing none, thank you very much for being with us today and presenting your information. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And now we'll turn to UNR, and we have Director Ducey-Paris, and she will help us look at the UNR data.
Thank you, Chancellor Rose. Actually, Dr. Lohman from our Office of Student Persistent Research is here and will go through it for us. Thank you.
Terrific, thank you, and welcome, Dr. Lohman.
Thank you. Jennifer Lohman, Director of Student Persistence Research for the Division of Student Services at UNR. I'm going to review an older slide deck. I provided a lot of slides, but I'll take you through the highlights because we've done 3 waves of climate survey research. Over time, it became increasingly more a needs assessment and an evaluation than it was a climate study, and I'll explain why as we go. So if you could advance, please. So we did 3 waves of climate survey research in 2014, 2016, and 2018. And as someone asked or requested numbers, those percentages represent about 5,000 degree-seeking students and includes undergraduate and graduate students each time we conducted the survey. Please advance. In 2014, our climate survey was based almost entirely on the Federal Campus Climate Toolkit, the Not Alone or McCaskill report. You might be more familiar with it. It used a very broad definition and data collection strategy to identify sexual misconduct, defining it mostly as forced unwanted sexual contact. Over time, researchers at Rutgers and other universities started to suss out different types of misconduct and really explore or experiment with keywords that prompted students to report different types of misconduct. So we took their feedback on that initial climate survey and we added some information on social network abuse and interpersonal violence. It was still a very broad definition of sexual misconduct that was being collected at the time, but it was more narrowly identified as social coercion, and that's interpersonal coercion where you might threaten to, say, share pictures of a former intimate partner if they don't have sex with you again. And then at the more forcible level, the unwanted sexual contact that we often label as rape. Over time then in 2018, we also added more information on gender role stress, on masculinity, femininity, and how it might be involved. And we also sussed out harassment and stalking behaviors. So by 2018, we had a much more narrowly defined collection of what sexual misconduct represented, from unwanted touching to unwanted penetration, including still social coercion, but also rape. So what we found then, looking at those surveys over time, was about 6% of our students were reporting that they were raped, 9% reporting that they had been sexually assaulted by means of coercion, mostly verbal coercion and threats, and then 22% were reported unwanted touching. And if you think about the numbers you often hear is 1 in 5 college women being assaulted, that unwanted touching gets closer to that number. So we also broke the numbers out by who might be considered a typical college student, those women between 18 and 25 years of age. The numbers are very similar, with 7% of rape, 10% sexual assault, and 23% reporting unwanted touching. I didn't really stress the point early on, but we took a census approach to doing the survey because we were also doing a very broad educational campaign as we invited people to take the survey. So we didn't use probability sampling techniques. So these data aren't strictly generalizable to the broader student population because that census approach was a non-probability approach. And we were also including student government and to help us recruit students to take the surveys. We were also working with many of the other prevention activists on campus to get the word out. Another element of our surveys is that we also stressed that it was not a reporting tool, and we routinely gave information throughout participation in the survey that if a student needed to report sexual assault, that they should go to Title IX and report that assault. And in that way, we discouraged them from telling a full story as much as we did encourage them to share some details of the context of their assault. So these are just things to consider as you get closer to making some methodological decisions down the road. Please advance. Oh, please advance the slide. All right, so I'm just going to point out a few things we found, and this is over the surveys and over time, of course, that women was the biggest population at risk, as were students in fraternities and sororities. And yes, that does include men in fraternities, as well as women in sororities, and then students with diverse sexuality. So especially our gay men were found to be highly victimized by other gay men and in situations with former intimate partners. And we know that because we did include that interpersonal violence component to our survey. Please advance. So women, sorority women, those with diverse sexual identities are most likely to experience all forms of sexual misconduct, from harassment, stalking, interpersonal violence, and the unwanted sexual contact. And fraternity men, like I said, were more likely to experience all types of sexual violence compared to men more generally. Please advance. One element that we added in 2018 that we hadn't had a good measure of in 2014 and 2016 was the timing of the assault. And we found that 58% of students who experienced coercion and those who identified as rape survivors reported that they had been assaulted their first year on campus in the fall semester. So 69% in the fall semester, 21% in the spring semester, and 10% in the summertime. So identifying that element in the fall semester was really important for us because I don't present some information on where students were learning about resources on campus. But of course, as you on your campuses probably also do, we really flood information with students with information at summer orientation and then in their start to the fall semester. So we were really seeing that at least the information's going out at the time that they're at highest risk. Though the fact that they're overloaded with quite a bit of information at that time is something we found that when they recall where they learned this information, it's actually quite difficult for the students to remember where they learn who to go to, where to go. It's really too much information in that case. So 55% of all survivors did report 2 or more incidences of sexual assault, something we continue to focus on as we really try to understand student likelihood of being a victim, where they're most at risk. And as we really narrowed it down to certain populations that were a higher risk, we were able to find then, as I mentioned earlier and don't provide here, that gay men in particular were reporting multiple incidences of sexual assault. Please advance. For our campus, which we do have a number of residence halls, we did find that the majority of sexual assaults were happening off campus. But when an assault did happen on campus and in a residence hall, it was of the most severe type. So as you can see in the graphical display on this slide, very few reports of on-campus assault, but those that were in the residence halls were more severe. Please advance. Assessing who the students told, approximately a third of them told no one, though they were more likely to tell someone if it was of the more severe type of assault. If it was forcible or physical penetration, they were more likely to tell somebody. But reasons they didn't tell, they didn't realize it was assault at the time, and so they thought time had run out once they came around to thinking of the experience as an assault. And often this was because the assault happened in a relationship or with a former sexual partner. They also didn't want to ruin his or her reputation or the reputation of the person because they cared for them. They also weren't sure if they were supposed to report assaults that didn't happen when they were a student. For many of our gay and lesbian students on campus, they were afraid it would out them because they were still in the closet. They were still really concerned with the perception of what had happened, the perception people would have of them if they reported it. In many cases, especially with our men, if the perpetrator was female, they didn't think they would be believed. And another reason they didn't report is because their partner, and this was often reported by women, had apologized later, and they felt the case was, in that case, closed. Please advance. So when they did tell, and we asked whom they told, and got very specific in that, we were looking, though, how many students went to Title IX. Those students who experienced coercion, about 6% reported that they went to Title IX. Those students who experienced rape, about 8% reported they went to Title IX. So, of course, as many of you have already observed, this is a big gap in reporting. Please advance. Their perception of how the university handled the investigation, both men and women agreed the university would handle a case of sexual assault fairly, and where they differed, men were more likely to believe that the university would take action against the accused, and men were also more likely to believe that the person's educational achievement would suffer. And at the time, when we were working with the Office of Student Conduct in Title IX, there were several cases on campus where men who were accused were voiceably sharing their sense of victimization themselves in the process. And so another thing to consider is sort of the context when the survey is out there, what's going on. We think this did have some influence when we were collecting this data at the time. Please advance. One thing that we added later in the next two survey waves was a measure of perpetration. We were sort of exploring, would students be willing to identify as a perpetrator? And we explored and experimented with some questions and found that 3 to 10% of participants reported having at least one friend. So if you think about how willing you are to identify you engage in taboo behaviors, we first asked them if their friends did this behavior, and then we asked them if they did this behavior. Students are much more likely to out their friends as engaging in this behavior. So their reports then the most, let's see, the forced sexual activity, the three most serious reports, hitting or beating a partner and blackmailing a partner for sex. 132 students gave some indication their friends had done these things to other people. And actually, you can advance the next slide. It highlights those three areas. Oh, and also using alcohol to get sex. Sorry, I should include that as well. 10% use alcohol to get sex. We did go deeply into alcohol, so if you'll advance to the next slide. As we looked at the relationships between students, we assessed consent at the time because our climate survey evolved into something more akin to a needs assessment of our programs and especially our prevention programs on campus, which were heavily focused on sexual consent, on achieving what we say is enthusiastic consent. We had a big section on consent. At the time, only 45% of sexually active participants always asked for verbal consent. 31% rarely or never asked for consent throughout the encounter. So we really conceptualize this as a perception gap of what students want to do, think they should do, but then what they actually do during the encounter. And it became really important for our programming on campus to talk about nonverbal and verbal cues of consent in the moment. 42% of students haven't heard their peers discussing consent issues. So at the time, our goal was really to make it part of our culture. 42% is a good indicator. Of course, we have a lot of room to grow there. Please advance. Who is less likely to ask for consent? And this is really just from our last survey when we added looking at masculine and feminine traits, gender role stress. And of course, we really found that students who endorse masculine traits, and this is true for both men and women, believe they endorse things like taking risks, not showing emotions, that they don't need to ask for help, that they will win at all costs. Those students who endorse these traits, and for men only, of course, endorsing physical violence, were less likely to report they asked for consent. So this is getting a little bit deeper into interpersonal processes and what might be labeled more social psychological processes of relationships between men and women and what they think they need to do or don't need to do. And it was addressed in our consent programming at the time, though I don't believe it is currently. And those with friends who endorse sexual violence were also less likely to ask consent. So we have some intersecting behaviors there. Please advance. We also asked about hooking up, students who are looking for singular experiences or who are looking for quick hookups, and hooking up behaviors were significantly correlated with both perpetrating and being a victim of sexual assault. Please advance. 38% of students who've hooked up at least once while being a student, and of those who are sexually active, it increases quite a bit to 48%. Those students then who reported hooking up were also more likely to experience sexual assault. The majority weren't hooking up very often, sort of against the hypothesis we had. So we are sort of looking into students reporting that behavior. How sensitive is the information we were asking, and were we getting quality reports at that time? So we're still working on those questions. I say we. I'm now an office of one. I used to be an office of two, so I say we a lot, but I'm actually just an office of one now, so I should say I. Both students who do and do not hook up agree that it's normal. It's a normal thing for college students to do. They really endorse hooking up as a normal behavior in that case. And we were looking at doing social norming campaigns if that wasn't the case, but everyone sort of accepts it as a normal behavior. Please advance. Where students go to find hookup partners were also some of the areas students reported to being sexually assaulted. 60% look for hookup partners at parties, on social media apps, or in bars and clubs. So our prevention programming at the time was helping students navigate those encounters, especially before alcohol got involved. Please advance. Because alcohol is a big risk factor, so perceptions of alcohol and their role in sexual encounters have remained fairly stable over time. 26% of students reported that alcohol makes them sexier. So in that case, they're really using alcohol for what I think most of us do is as a social lubricant, but it's really leading towards that sexual encounter. 14% reported it was involved in their last sexual encounter, and 52% reported that it facilitates a sexual opportunity. So this did decrease over time, this last indicator, from 64% in 2014 to 52% in 2018. And at the time, I attributed that to much of the consent programming that we were doing on campus, which had really taken a turn that you can't consent if you're drunk. You can't give consent. Please advance. We also looked at bystander information. This is where students were asked what they had done if they had observed a situation that could have led to assault. For baseline, 18% of students in 2018 had observed that kind of situation. And of those who observed the event, over 90% said they intervened. At the time, students were likely to recognize these dangerous situations. Personally, I'm still trying to figure out what is the quality control we could put on this report that 90% of students are intervening when they see something like this. So I think there's a lot to be improved in this part of the survey as well. Please advance. Regarding sex differences between students, there was an important difference. Men were more likely to say they intervened through these tactics, asking if the target person was all right, separating those involved, confronting the perpetrator, getting others involved. Women were more likely to take the tactics, again, asking if the target was all right, separating those involved, but also distracting the target if they would just try to get their friend away from the person, make up a lie. And that's part of our prevention programming at the time on campus as well. And then women were more likely, or just as likely as men, to get others to help. But that direct, delegate, distract was really our messaging at the time. So distract was the tactic women were more likely to take in this case. Please advance. And key points to remember. Sorry, timing on these slides way back then, so you can fill it all in. Sexual assault does threaten student success. The threat of sexual assault is greater for men and women, and that first semester is critical. The behaviors we champion to prevent sexual assault require empathy, perspective taking. As I said, doing an assessment of our consent programming and our bystander interventions. We never really came to a conclusion that the reports we got from students were a good representation of what students actually did. But over time, we did see that they were getting the message. Whether or not they were engaging the behaviors, I think we could do better measuring in the future. I'm not going to report on this in this slide deck, but we had quite a bit on toxic masculinity, which at the time was a big buzzword in 2018. And we had a lot of hostile reports within our survey from men who might be categorized as having toxic masculinity. It was actually quite insightful and led us to do some follow-up surveys to understand how men with strong masculine identities, but who felt threatened by feminism and other forms of the consent agenda or the liberal agenda on campus, how they responded to just taking a survey like this. We did find they had some really interesting survey tactics to sort of disrupt the data, which I think is something this task force might need to be aware of, that not everyone who takes your survey is going to be trying to give you good data. And we worked really hard to understand when we had good or bad data. In that case, our follow-up studies were really important to understand the role of toxic masculinity just in survey taking in general. If you could advance to the next slide. And really, it's that follow-up work we did on sexism and racism and homophobia and how they intersect that became part of our messaging in 2018, as we were also dealing with some extremist white identity groups on campus. So nothing outside of the context of those times, but certainly still relevant today. And these groups continue to have members on our campus that are advocating white identity, strict gender roles, and sex is a big part of that interpersonal factor. So my final statement, we ignore their presence and their fear really at our own students' peril. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr.
You can
Lohman.
advance the finest, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were finished. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yes, I did. I thought I was also finished. I want to say, because you all have a copy of the slide deck, the Be Heard website isn't actually up to date. I can work on getting it up to date because it has quite a few resources from when we conducted the surveys, but it is old at this point. So if you have or download resources from that Be Heard website, please let me know if you need the more up-to-date resources, and I'll get to work updating that website with the most current information that we have. So thank you. Sorry for interrupting.
No worries. Thank you very much, Dr. Lohman, for that information. I wonder if the committee has any questions at this time. Yes, please.
Thank you, Dr. Lohman, for the comprehensive report. So I have one question, like, what was the rationale of selecting even years like 2014, 2016, and 2018? And tied with this question, was the time frame when the survey was distributed consistent across these years?
Yes, actually, I think I just understood the second part of your question. We distributed the survey each November of those years. So it was November of 2014 and November each consecutive wave. And what was the first part of your question?
The first part was, what was the rationale of choosing 2014, 16, 18? In other words, skipping 15 and 17.
The McCaskill report came out in maybe late 2013, early 2014. So we put together that first survey actually very quickly and in response to a notion that the federal government was going to require universities to do climate surveys. And so using the Not Alone report and climate survey toolkit that the federal government provided actually made it very easy to quickly put together a survey that same year that that report came out, so late 2013, early 2014, and we did it the next fall.
Thank you so much.
Doing it every other year is more of a resource issue. My office also manages a number of climate surveys on campus. So spreading out all the climate surveys and needs assessments is just a practical.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lohman.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for Dr. Lohman?
Allison Netsky for the record. So I was wondering if you also have the Clery data and how that compares to the data from your climate survey.
My office doesn't collect or manage the Clery data. I'm primarily an assessment office, not an official reporting office. So I don't have that data personally, and I don't track it. It's very similar to what was reported with very low numbers by comparison, 7 or 8 instances reported, but very uneven over time, so no clear trend. But Maria, would you like to speak to that?
Hello, this is Maria DeSeperi for the record. I think that's accurate. The numbers don't parallel, and that's why we actually presented these numbers, because we think this is a truer assessment of what we see on our campus. We work closely with this office to construct questions that we think will give us the information that we need. And then obviously we base our training, our efforts on campus based on what we're seeing from this and not necessarily the Clery numbers. Our Clery numbers are available. I just don't have them before me right now, so I can't share those exactly with you, but we do have those numbers. But again, we think these are much truer to what we see on our campus and in our community.
Thank you.
Was there another question from the committee?
I have a question.
Yes, please, go ahead and identify yourself for the record.
Leslie Ramirez for the record. I was just wondering, one of the statistics that you brought was that the majority of instances happened off campus. I'm not sure if there's anything that spells out exactly like either those locations that were off campus, or if that's something that was considered, and if so, if that was something that was represented or not.
Not any better than what is the data on that slide. So very 4 categories. Did it happen off campus, in a residence hall, fraternity, sorority hall, or in a I already said a residence hall on campus?
Just as an addition to that, I think it would be best also to start looking at what these off-campus locations are, just to kind of centralize where these instances are happening and kind of be a little bit more specific. But thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Lohman, this is Joe Reynolds. I have one question too. Is there any kind of training that UNR does regarding sexual misconduct as a part of its Nevada Fit program with incoming freshman students to the UNR campus?
Aloha, Maria de Sipuri for the record. Yes. And actually, based on what we saw through these surveys, which told us that most of the conduct, a lot of the sexual assaults were occurring at the beginning of the semester. But as Dr. Lohman mentioned, students felt so overwhelmed from what they were getting in orientation. We've actually restructured. We don't do online training for our incoming students because it's just not effective. We actually meet with them in orientation, but then throughout, as part of their Nevada Fit program, they are all required to attend an in-person course. And we stretch that throughout the first semester so that we can meet with each and every freshman or transfer student in person throughout that first semester. And we found that since we've done that, our numbers have gone down. Not just survey numbers, but as we're seeing, our clear numbers, our numbers in the office, we're seeing, obviously, we're still having different types of incidents, but we're not seeing as many of those more serious type incidents. And that also, we've also restructured or added a number of other training programs. So I can't say specifically it's just that first year meet with every freshman, but we have, as Dr. Lohman mentioned, the consent programs. We do a lot of consent programming in addition to our sexual harassment awareness and prevention education program. We have trainings that are specifically driven or focused on consent. And so we do those really popular with our fraternities and sororities right now, consent and decision making. And so we actually go through and go into a lot in depth with each of those individuals.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for UNR? All right, I see none. So I'm going to, we're going to go to WNC and wrap up this agenda item, and then we're going to take a short break before moving on to agenda item number 6. So we should have with us Melody Dooley from WNC. Good afternoon. Good to see you.
Good afternoon. For the record, I am Melody Dooley, D-U-L-E-Y. I am the Director of Human Resources as well as the Title IX Coordinator at Western Nevada College. So I have some data and trends for you today from Western Nevada College going back to 2017. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about some key facts and figures about Western Nevada College that I think are relevant to this conversation. Then I have some sexual assault data, as well as 2 key responses I'd like to show you from our sexual conduct and safety survey, and then a couple slides for you on our prevention and response efforts. You would advance. Thank you, and one more time. You'd advance again, there we go, thank you. So on this slide, you can see our service area and how 80% of our students come from this 5-county rural region. We have campuses in Carson City, Fallon, and Douglas. We serve approximately 5,000 students annually. And relevant, I think, to our conversation today is that we do not have residence halls. I didn't include this on the slide, but we also do not have athletics. Both of those, I think, are key factors in the data that I have for you today. Next slide, please. And the data I've brought, I focused in on the sexual assault offenses as they are defined in the FBI's uniform crime reporting. So that includes rape, fondling, incest, and statutory rape. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is our data using the Clery Act reporting method going back to 2018. You can see in 2018 and 2020, we did not have any reports. In 2019, we had 1 report of rape, and in 2021, we had 2 reports of rape. The 2 reports of rape in 2021 do correspond to a Title IX complaint. The report of rape in 2019 did not correspond to a Title IX complaint. So that gives us some of that picture of where things are and are not being reported. Next slide, please. And now a little bit about our sexual conduct and safety survey. As GBC mentioned, we split that survey with them. It's conducted for us by UNR. We conduct it every other year in the spring semester. Our most recent surveys were in 2017 and 2019. We had one scheduled for 2021, but we decided to postpone that as most of our students were still remote at that time. So instead, we are conducting it this spring. In fact, it opens this afternoon if it hasn't opened already, and that will run through the first couple of weeks in March. Next slide, please. Thank you. So a couple of key responses that I'd like to show you from our 2017 and 2019 surveys are on perceptions and potential outcomes. The first one I want to talk about is we asked respondents to predict the likelihood of potential outcomes if they were to report a sexual assault to college officials. And when we talk about the data, I just want to point out that in 2017, the responses were on a 7-point scale, in 2019 on a 5-point scale, but you'll see that the responses were very similar. Next slide, please. So in general, during both of those 2 survey years, the participants tended to believe that Western Nevada College would very likely take the report seriously, protect the safety of the accuser, limit the knowledge of the report, protect the accuser from retaliation, and take corrective action against offenders. Those strong agreements with that being very likely are very encouraging to us. In those same years, participants tended not to believe that the alleged offenders or their associates would retaliate against the accusers. They tended not to believe that accusers would be labeled as troublemakers. They also tended not to believe that the education of the accuser would suffer. And if you go to the next slide, you can see the graphic responses for 2017. You can see that on our 7-point scale and the perception that it is highly likely that WNC would respond and take it seriously, protect the safety of the accuser, and so forth. And then the next slide has the graphic from our 2019 responses on that question. This is on the 5-point scale, but you can see still very similar responses between those 2 survey years. Next slide. And then the other response I wanted to give you an idea of from the 2017 and 2019 surveys was when we asked the participants what their agreement would be with a set of statements describing perceptions that students may or may not have about sexual assault at WNC, as well as their engagement with sexual assault and sexual misconduct prevention efforts. Again, in 2017, we had a 7-point scale, and in 2019, a 5-point scale. Next slide, please. In both years, the participants generally agreed that sexual assault and sexual misconduct are not problems at Western Nevada College. They agreed that there was not a need to think about sexual assault and sexual misconduct at Western Nevada College. I have some mixed feelings on that one. I'm relieved that our students don't feel like they need to worry about that on our campus, but I also hope it's not something that they never think about or that there is a lack of awareness for. They also mostly agreed that they could do something about sexual assault and sexual misconduct. Then for the second part of that question, we asked them to tell us their interest in participating in sexual assault and sexual misconduct prevention programs. In 2017, they tended to disagree that they would like to attend something like that. In 2019, we saw a little change there, and participants were primarily neutral about attending a sexual assault and sexual misconduct prevention program. So I'm very curious to see how that changes through this semester's survey. Next slide, please. Here's the graphic of the responses from 2017. You can see the high perceptions that it's not a problem at Western Nevada College, that they don't need to think about it and they can do something about it. You can see the rather low agreement that they'd like to attend a program. And then the next slide has 2019. And again, this one's on our 5-point scale. You can see, though, still high likelihood or a high perception that sexual misconduct and sexual assault are not problems at WNC. Then towards the middle, you can see more neutral responses that they would like to attend sexual assault, sexual misconduct prevention programs. Slide, please. And now a little bit about our prevention and response efforts. The prevention efforts focus highly on training. For employees, we provide Clery Act and Title IX training, as well as preventing and responding to sexual harassment, assault, stalking, and relationship abuse. It is mandatory training that we require upon hire and then every 2 years thereafter. We also offer additional in-person sexual harassment prevention training during our professional development week. Many of our faculty prefer that method. The other ones are online format-based, so we also occasionally offer an in-person. Then for student training, we provide them the opportunity to complete preventing sexual assault, harassment, and relationship abuse training. We are required to offer it at least once a year. However, because of our student population, we offer it each fall and spring semester. We have many who only attend one semester or the other. So this way, we're sure we're at least putting the opportunity out there for any student, regardless of the semester they may attend. Unfortunately, the completion rate of that optional training is very low. So this year, before we open that up in spring semester, we are considering incentives to offer students to encourage them to complete that training. Next slide. And then finally, we have some information on our response efforts. And that is to really target key personnel with Title IX and Clery training. We have a membership with ATICSA, that's the Association of Title IX Administrators. We have 4 key employees who have a combined total of 6 ATICSA certifications since 2020. We also have a membership with Academic Impressions, which offers a variety of higher education training topics, articles, and resources of that nature. On this platform, we have 5 key employees who have completed over 18 Title IX training sessions since 2020. And then up next in 2022, we have 10 to 12 employees who will also complete Campus Security Authority training related to Clery Act for those employees who have not completed it already. And that is everything I have for you this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Melody. And I wonder if there are any questions or comments from the committee for WNC. Yes, please, Dr. Gunn.
Elizabeth Gunn, thank you for the valuable data and information. Might you have an idea of how many students are undergoing this training each year?
Yeah, for the training that I mentioned on one of those last slides that we offer to the students, that completion rate, I believe last time we offered it was 7%, which is obviously not very encouraging. And you could see from the survey responses, there wasn't a whole lot of interest in that to begin with. We do incidentally get a slightly higher response rate on our sexual conduct and safety survey. I believe in 2017, our response rate on that was just about 20%. It went down quite a bit in 2019 to just about 14%. But we are considering incentives for both of those programs to encourage completion with students.
All right, thank you so much. May I ask what kind of incentives, just so we get an idea of what might be working?
Sure. Yeah. Well, we're not sure yet. We've offered incentives on a few other things for students that aren't really related to these topics, but they got really great feedback on things like AirPods and Chromebook, iPad, that type of thing. We had one student who was elated to have won an air fryer. We're also looking at gift cards. It might be bookstore swag, Western Nevada College logoed merchandise. As well as free classes. We've raffled those off as well. So we've tried some of the goodies. I think for the survey, we're going to try some gift cards to very particular areas, kind of see how well that works, and then we'll decide which ones we want to use for the sexual assault, sexual misconduct prevention program in the spring.
All right. Anything else for WNC?
I have one question. This is Kavita Batra for records. So do you think the use of different scaling criteria in 2017, which was 1 to 7, like 7-item Likert scale, and then versus 5-item in 2019, created comparability issues for you?
Yeah, I think it did. And I don't have the history on why the change in that rating scale, but I know from having conducted surveys in the past that anytime we make an alteration like that, we sort of lose connection to our baseline information. I am very encouraged to hear of the task force's agenda to discuss a climate survey that sounds like it might be a system-wide approach. That knowing that it would probably set a new baseline for us. But it seems to me that the larger and broader scale that we conduct these things on would tend to have less change from year to year, and thus let us always have a better comparison to the baseline.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, any final questions for WNC? Okay, I see and hear none. So I think just first want to thank all of the campuses for this information as we're just getting going in this initial meeting. It's been, I think, very helpful to get some baseline understanding of how the campuses are handling their sexual misconduct data and how they are surveying or not surveying on their campuses. And I think what we've seen is a wide variety of responses and development of these activities, which for me, just speaking for myself, was very informative. So thank you all very much for that. I think the group needs to take a break before we come back to discuss how we might wish to move forward with survey instrument. So I see it's about 3:32. Why don't we return at 3:40? That should give everybody enough time to get up and stretch. All right, thank you. Okay, now that we've all had a stretch break, I think I will call us back to order. Hopefully see our colleagues popping back on our screen as well. All right, for information only, we are moving on to agenda item number 6, the climate survey development, which really is the meat of our conversation today. I think the level setting has been very valuable and informative as we begin to discuss thoughts from this group of experts around what an appropriate survey instrument would look like on a go-forward basis. And so under this item, I'd like to encourage a conversation on the development of metrics and a methodology that may be involved in an NSHE system-wide climate survey regarding sexual misconduct. And under SB 347, of course, we know that the definition of misconduct includes dating violence, domestic violence, gender-based violence, gender-based harassment, violence based on sexual orientation or gender identity or expression, sexual assault, sexual harassment, stalking, or indecent exposure. And as you've heard under agenda item number 5, some of our institutions are already administering climate surveys, but some have not yet implemented this tool, and for others, it's been a while since they've done so. Data and knowledge are a major key to understanding sexual misconduct, but the full value of the data we collect and analyzed really won't be realized until it's translated into meaningful and consistent action. And of course, I'm preaching to the choir among this group in stating that, but I think it's important that we state it. Therefore, climate surveys are a vital aspect to improving survival trust, to increasing reporting, and to satisfying genuine safety in our campus communities. We must use our data to develop evidence-based, culturally relevant policies and programs. And this also means we must continue collecting data to monitor and evaluate the impact of our efforts, existing and future, so that we may be sure we are making sound decisions and implementing effective policies and really entering into a cycle of continuous improvement and adjustment where necessary. This agenda item was added for all of us to share our initial thoughts on what the development of metrics and a proper methodology would look like from a system-wide, holistic approach. So I just want to check to see if Chief General Counsel Reynolds has any thoughts in this regard. And then we'll move to a broader conversation of the committee.
Thank you, Chancellor Rose. Joe Reynolds, for the record. A couple other things to just point out for the task force and anyone who's also watching this meeting. In addition to the section 13 that I discussed earlier in my overview, also there is a section 15 in SB 347 that also gives direction pursuant to ratification by the Board of Regents on what should be done with these climate surveys once that information is obtained. And just noteworthy, it's establish a repository for summaries by institution and also system-wide. Have those summaries available on the internet. And also adopt a policy on how the climate survey information is disseminated throughout the NSHE institutions and our campus communities. And also then also has an additional provision is that what's posted are to be summaries, but the underlying raw data is confidential. So that certainly we're still protecting anonymity and confidentiality. And just to dovetail back a comment I made in my observation of this bill is to strike that necessary balance of providing new transparency and new accountability, and at the same time, the balance of a safe place for this information to be gathered and stored.
And with that, we'll open the conversation up to the committee. We've got a lot of expertise in this group, and I encourage you all to jump in and lead the way.
If I may, I'd like to say something. Zachary Johnigan for the record. I noticed that you were saying in section 15, it wants us to make sort of a repository of the information or make it available on the website. I wanted to know if the committee is aware of, well, they should be aware of the NSHE data dashboard that's located on our NSHE website. Perhaps there could be a section added to that. It has so much good analytics and information on there as far as diversity and enrollment. Perhaps we could coordinate with the team who manages the NSHE data dashboard and add the results of the survey to there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for the suggestion.
Allison Netsky for the record. I think in starting off this process, it would be informative to know in other universities if there are largely known best practices that are already occurring with validated surveys that that are out there that are published in the literature that we could first identify as a starting point and identify if there are certain characteristics of schools that make these surveys more palatable or not, or more informative than not. I don't know if people already have some of that information or what the thoughts of the group are about that.
It's a good question, and certainly one that we can explore further, but for the moment, I wonder if there's anyone here within the task force who would like to begin to populate an answer to the question. Any suggested survey instruments that have been demonstrated in the field?
Sorry, go ahead. Dr. Rose, Tina Russum for the record, Deputy General Counsel. The McCaskill report, is my understanding, is one of those in the field that's published federally. I've not done extensive research on that most recently. I did some research on it in February of last year when we were working on the legislation for this. But there are, in fact, national climate survey recommendations and published articles and publications that we could use as a guiding star in this regard.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like Dr. Bacha has some additional comment.
This is Kavita Patra for the record. So I just want to extend the conversation that Dr. Netsky and Tina has raised about having a validated instruments and also the climate surveys. So I was looking at the literature and in alignment with section 2A means to utilize the best practices from peer-reviewed research. So I was looking at some articles, and I don't have like in the top of my mind the exact names of the survey instrument, but I'm 100% confident that we will be able to find validated instrument to address all the constructs of interest as it relates to sexual misconduct. So maybe in the next meeting, I can volunteer to present few ideas of survey instruments which have been validated in the past.
Thank you for that suggestion. When we get to new business, that might be something you recommend. Yes.
And Dr. Rose, if Dr. Lohman is still present in Reno, she may be very helpful in aiding this portion of the conversation.
Certainly. Be happy to hear from you, Dr. Lohman.
Yes, thank you. Yes, as somebody, or Tina, as you suggested, the McCaskill port is still, I think, the best source for climate survey information and validated survey instruments. As I said, I know Rutgers has done a lot of work on extending the collection of experiences of misconduct, increasing then that reliability that people are reporting what you think they're reporting based on if you're looking at coercion or physical force, and really getting into differences between stalking and harassment, interpersonal violence, domestic violence. So I think there's a lot of information there that is, if you do a search online, is clearly tied back to the McCaskill report. And so I would say that's still your best source. And of course, I didn't mention this, but the survey that I created in 2016 and the changes I make was the same survey that WNC and GBC also used because they were working with Ronnie DeHeer at the Center for Surveys here at UNR. So I think we've done at least some of the work for you, and we have some comparable data. And the McCaskill report, I think, is actually going to get you pretty far in identifying those instruments.
And Dr. Lohman, while we have you, this is Melody Rose for the record. I wonder in a future meeting if we define space to dive into the McCaskill report and talk about Rutgers as well, whether you would be able to provide us with the survey instrument that has been used in those northern institutions as a way of just grounding us in a conversation rather than, throwing spaghetti at the wall.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
This is at least 3 years of my career working on this information and with Maria. So we have lots of stored knowledge that, we got to keep putting it to use to make it worthwhile.
Thank you very much. I suspected that was your answer, but I wanted to ask just the same.
And if I may, Dr. Rose, Tina Russom for the record, I have been in contact with Veronica Dare, spelled D-A, and I apologize, I want to make sure I spell her last name right. She did submit public comment, but she is one of the individuals that is working on the climate survey for Great Basin and WNC, which will in fact be going live immediately after this meeting. But she was planning on attending the meeting in Reno. She will be, she is watching, but I think I would be remiss if I didn't mention that she may also be an individual that could help aid this committee in this discussion and presenting some of those measurement tools before this task force, if that would be the will of this task force. And her last name is D-A-H-I-R, but she's assured me it's pronounced as Dare, D-A-R-E.
Okay. Thank you for that. I know we have a lot of resources and a lot of talent within our system, so I want to make sure that we use it. Thank you. Other comments, suggestions, requests around how we might move ourselves forward toward the development of an appropriate system-wide survey?
I have a comment, but I just want to make sure, I can't see who else is in the room. I'd like them to go first.
Thank you, President Jonigan. I think you're go right ahead.
Okay, great. Zachary Jonigan for the record. I wanted to know, how can we ensure we have a high turnout of this survey? I believe the data that we are going to be trying to obtain is very important data, and we want to make sure that we cast a large net. Can we discuss possibly putting, well, and this is going to segue into my next question as far as time frame. Can we put this survey as a part of the enrollment process? A lot of our institutions have certain like stipulations, things you have to do before you can enroll or take a class. You have to fill out some things. Could it be possible that as a part of the enrollment process, they would have to take this survey to ensure that we get a lot of data and feedback? And then as far as time frame, would that be possible? Are we going to launch the survey soon, or?
Well, thank you for the question. I'll give a stab at an answer, but I would also welcome my colleagues to join in this response. A couple of thoughts on that. One is that I don't, just to put the cards on the table, I don't think we are going to implement a survey soon. I think it takes a lot of care and study and testing to get the instrument exactly right. And also, I think we would be remiss if we didn't use some shared governance and get wider input before we launch such a thing. And we need to involve the board as well, per the legislation. So I think that there are some hurdles to getting this out the door quickly, because I think we want to make sure that we've designed something that will stand the test of time and that we can use repeatedly, so that we ultimately are developing longitudinal data and don't find that we've made mistakes in our question sequencing or word choice, et cetera. So just to put cards on the table, I don't see this happening quickly. The question, though, that you're asking, and I want to make sure that we really take note, is another very important question that does have best practices around it, which is how do we get a great response rate? And that is equally important to the question of how do we design a great survey. And so I really want to make sure that we're taking note of that, because I believe that in the future the committee will want to investigate that very closely as well. And I think that there's best practice in the survey research industry, of which several of us are a part, that can help us inform that. And we also might learn some best practices from other institutions across the country and how they're tying survey completion to other touch points with relevant stakeholders. So thank you for noting that. It's going to be an important conversation, because we don't want to go to all of this work to have no one fill out the survey.
Yeah, not meeting for nothing. So also a follow-up to that for Chief Joe Reynolds, just your input after reviewing the Senate bill. Was there anything expressed as far as time frame? Of course, Chancellor Rose has told us that we shouldn't really worry about the time. We should make sure that we have a quality survey. But was there anything in the Senate bill as far as a time of when we should be acting on this?
Joe Reynolds for the record. Again, good question. There's reporting timeframes that are in the bill in terms of getting information both to the Board of Regents and the Legislative Commission. And I believe one of the dates is December 1st. But not within that, that's if, something is developed and we start gathering information through a survey instrument. But I'll defer to Deputy Counsel Russum if you have any other insight on the question.
Tina Russum, Deputy General Counsel for the record. Chief General Counsel Reynolds is correct, President Jonigan. The statutory language did not contemplate a specific time frame for a turnaround on the climate survey development. And some of that is because of the methodologies that are involved in creating a survey, and specifically wanting to make sure, as Dr. Rose mentioned, that those survey tools are reliable. We can produce a survey hypothetically tomorrow, but we want to ensure that the surveys we're producing and receiving answers to are giving us as reliable of data as we can obtain. So in the statutory language and in the drafting of this, there was no specific time frame. Of course, it's something that we want to keep a pulse on and we want to keep in the forefront of this task force agenda, as it is one of the specific statutory charges for this task force. But I truly think that it is one of those agenda items that will be a reoccurring theme as this task force continues its work is to continue to work with the experts that we do have available to us to learn, to grow, and also to develop a complete or rather a complete survey. But in terms of that time frame, my advice would be that we defer to those experts. And as you've learned, there are several on our campuses presently, and they may be able to speak more directly to that on a future agenda item. I hope that's answered your question.
Yes, thank you, Deputy President.
If I might add as well, one thing I think we should take note of in the legislation, which is Section 13, is the very beginning of that first phrase is to the extent that money is available. And I think we have to acknowledge that survey research on this scale is not inexpensive if done well. And that implicates basically our campus budgeting process. And I think we're going to want to be very mindful that we are fortunate to be starting this process at the beginning of our budgeting cycle. So we will have the opportunity to cost some of this out in the coming months and understand implications for campuses. And I think, I don't want to speak for them, but one of the things I appreciate and heard certainly with Assemblywoman Torres and Senator Scheibel and their opening remarks earlier is that they may be expecting us to make a budget request for this item in the upcoming legislative session. And having been the sponsors of the bill, they shouldn't be surprised if that's one of the recommendations that comes out of our work. So I think even just acknowledging the fiscal impact of doing this well and consistently is something that will figure into the timeline.
Chancellor Rose, Joe Reynolds for the record, if I can also make a comment, because I think President Jorgensen's observation, I think, is really timely too. I think this task force has a unique opportunity right now, hopefully, fingers crossed, that we're transitioning from a pandemic to an endemic. If we would have had a survey instrument over the past 2 years or previous 2 years, I don't know that it would have been truly reflective of our student experience, as nothing has been normal for the past 2 years. And so hopefully as we're getting into a new chapter and a new phase, the timeliness of this group's work is relevant to that.
Mm-hmm. Right. Other considerations from the committee as we look to the work ahead? We've heard about the need to consider response rate and how to design for a strong response rate. We've talked about finances. We've talked about capturing best practices and being led by that, at a future meeting. What are their major considerations?
Allison Netsky for the record. I just have a clarification question, probably for either of our legal counsel, which is the scope of the survey, if the scope is solely on students, or if the scope is for all people in the institution.
Good question. Tina Russ, I'm Deputy General Counsel, and I'm looking for the specific provision, but one of the provisions within the statute, and I believe it's Section 13, it specifically brings up the language of student and things that specifically remedial measures that were provided to and I apologize, I'm sure Maria Duce-Puri is shaking her head because I should know the correct word to use there, so I apologize. But in terms of the accommodations that were provided to the survivor and things of that sort, but the language is really geared toward students and what perception the student has of Safety Campus, whether the student has confidence in the ability of the institution to protect against and respond to alleged incidents of sexual misconduct. So it really is geared more toward a student's perspective But I think that this task force may have a unique opportunity to make additional recommendations, keeping in mind resources and other tools that may be at our disposal to measure other types of misconduct.
This is Joe Reynolds for the record, and just to add on what Deputy Russum said, yeah, the climate survey is intended, I think, towards the student experience as opposed to necessarily the employee, an employee survey.
Yes, President Johnigan.
I'm full of questions today.
That's good. Thank you.
Once again, Zachary Johnigan, for the record. At the top of the Senate bill, SB 347, it says that we are to discuss compensation for the task force. Are we to be paid through our own institutions, or does the task force have a budget set up to discuss compensation?
Can you point to the section that you're referring to?
An act relating to, at the very top, an act relating to higher education, creating the task force on sexual misconduct at institutions of higher education, prescribing the membership, duties, and compensation of the task force.
Thank you for the question, President Johnigan, but I think that your question takes us beyond the scope of the agenda item. And so for the purposes of adherence to open meeting law, what I might suggest is that you raise that question in new business, such that we can take it up in a future meeting.
Okay, that would be an agenda item all in itself to discuss that portion of the SB 347.
Yes, because
Okay.
as you can see, the agenda item as we've defined for today is really about the survey itself. So hold that thought for new business.
All right.
If I can raise a suggestion, Leslie Ramirez, for the record. As mentioned before, I wanted to stress how important I believe it is to share or ask information in this climate survey about off-campus locations, just because it'll give us more of a scope, and it doesn't need to be, specific to the respondent, but or their house or a party, whether it be a bar, things like that. I think that's very, very important and insightful to realize where these instances are happening. And then also on top of that, if we can all agree to include any information or questions regarding STIs and STDs, testing and or education, or somehow involve that in the survey or in the education on the survey, just because that is a very large problem that I know happens when we, experience these instances. But that's pretty much my suggestions in terms of what to include in the climate survey. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think we'll make note of that for the record and be sure to address those things when we begin to look at some of the survey instruments that will be under consideration. We'll make sure to return to those items then. Please, Dr. Gunn.
Hi, Elizabeth Gunn. In complete agreement with the idea of a landscape analysis, a review of literature and best practices, to provide a couple of specific resources that fall within that scope. Dr. Lohman referenced something at Rutgers, which I was reviewing before this meeting today, and that is the 2019 report on sexual harassment prevention and culture change. So that is a good resource for the task force, as well as an organization that I've had some contact with in the past at previous institutions, which is Rankin and Associates, originally from Penn State, and now a consulting firm that has worked with institutions all over the country, large and small, public, private, and so forth. And their specialty is precisely climate surveys for U.S. institutions of higher education.
And for the record, could you repeat the name of that consulting firm?
Rankin, Rankin, and Associates Consulting, LLC.
Thank you. Okay, other major considerations as we imagine our future agendas and future work? All right.
If I may add again, sorry. Leslie Ramirez for the record. On the topic of how to get as many responses on this survey, I think that working with, and I'm not sure how it is for other colleges or other institutions, but working with each student organizations and student-led governments, they would be like your easiest and quickest way to get to students, whether that be, you know, when they host an event, fill out the survey and we'll give you free pizza. Things like that is what students really, really appreciate, and they tend to respond more with things like that. Like you said, or like was mentioned earlier too, incentives are very, very big plus to these things. But definitely keeping in contact with all student governments or any sort of like large association within each institution. Thank you.
And thank you for that, and that's why it's so valuable to have students and your voices here represented in the task force. Appreciate that. And I think we'll be talking much more about that and getting your perspective as we move through this process. Appreciate it. Anything else for this point? I think we've identified some significant bodies of work and have made some real progress today. If there's nothing further on this topic, seen none. I'm going to actually turn to agenda item number 7, which is for possible action, and this is the election of officers. And I'm going to turn that agenda item over to Deputy Russum to conduct.
Deputy Tina Russum, or I apologize, Tina Russum, Deputy General Counsel. I will be managing agenda item number 7. This is one of your charges as task force members. In section 12, subsection 3 of the Senate bill language, you are charged with electing a chair from among your members at the first meeting and then each odd year thereafter. So today, I will be opening up the floor for discussions and nominations for the position of chair and vice chair. Specifically, let's first start with chair. Are there any nominations for a chair for the task force?
And if this is Joe Reynolds, if I can also just add a little bit to that, putting on my lawyer hat. An affirmative vote of this task force as a public body is a quorum, which in this case would be a simple majority. And because there's 12 task force members, if everyone was present, it would be 7. In order to nominate someone for a chair or a vice chair position, you don't need a second. And you can also nominate yourself if you choose. And I think the procedure that Deputy Russum was also alluding to is we'll take nominations for a chair, resolve that, and then after that, consider a vice chair.
This is Allison Netsky for the record. I would like to nominate Dr. Gunn as the committee chair.
This is Kavita Batra for record. I would like to nominate Dr. Jennifer, we have to nominate from the committee, right? Okay. Dr. Allison Netsky.
This is Zachary Johnigan for the record. Can we ask the committee members, has anyone expressed interest in actually being the chair?
This is Joe Reynolds. I'll again put my lawyer hat on. Is respectfully no. You can either nominate a fellow member, or you can also nominate yourself.
Thank you. Zachary Johnigan, once again for the record, I nominate Chancellor Rose to be the chair of the committee.
Are there any other nominations? Okay, because we have 3 nominations, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a roll call vote. At the time I call your name, I would ask you to please provide me with the name of the individual that you are voting for. From there, one moment, I'll get to you in one moment, Dr. Netsky. So it would be well, actually, let me yield the floor to you and then I will continue speaking. Let me yield the floor, please.
Tina, is it possible to decline nomination?
It is. If you would prefer to decline, I can remove your name.
That would be my preference. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, where we have 2 nominations, what I will do then is take a roll call vote. And at the time I call your name, I will be asking you to provide me with the name of the individual you are voting for as chair. Again, we have 2 nominations. One is for Dr. Gunn, one is for Dr. Rose. So starting with Dr. Batcha, can you please provide me with the name of the individual you're voting for? Ms. Kristen DeMay, I apologize.
Dr. Rose?
Thank you. Maria Duce-Pri?
Rose.
Dr. Tabor Griswold?
Dr. Gunn.
Dr. Elizabeth Gunn?
Dr. Elizabeth Gunn.
Hi, could I abstain or cede my vote to Dr. Rose if she would like to serve, and if not, I would be delighted to.
This Joe Reynolds, again, putting on my lawyer hat here. Did you ask the question whether you wanted to abstain, or were you, no, you generally do need to vote.
Dr. Rose.
Zachary Jonigan?
Dr. Rose?
Dr. Allison Netsky?
Dr. Gunn, thank you.
Leslie Ramirez?
Dr. Rose?
Joe Reynolds?
Dr. Rose?
Dr. Rose?
Dr. Rose?
Michelle Sposito?
Dr. Rose?
Gwendolyn Thompson?
Dr. Rose?
And Dr. Rose has been elected as chair. So we look forward to her leadership. Now, if we can please move. Oh,
Deputy Councilor Russum, can you state what the final vote tally was?
yes, I apologize. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There are 9 for Dr. Rose and 1, 2, 3 for Dr. Gunn. Thank you. Now, if we may please move on to electing a vice chair. Does anyone have a motion for, or rather a nomination for vice chair?
Melody Rose, for the record, I nominate Dr. Gunn.
Zachary Jonigan, for the record, I second that nomination.
Maria Duce-Pri, for the record, I'd like to nominate Dr. Griswold.
Are there any other nominations? Okay, similar to how you voted previously for chair, I will be doing a roll call vote. Dr. Kavita Bacha.
Dr. Gunn?
Kristen DeMay.
Dr. Griswold?
Maria Duce-Pri.
Dr. Griswold.
Dr. Tabor Griswold.
Dr. Griswold.
Dr. Elizabeth Gunn.
Dr. Gunn.
Zachary Jonigan.
Dr. Gunn?
Dr. Allison Netsky.
Dr. Gunn.
Leslie Ramirez.
Dr. Griswold?
Joe Reynolds.
Dr. Gunn?
Dr. Melody Rose,
Dr. Gunn?
Michelle Sposito,
Dr. Gunn?
Gwendolyn Thompson,
Dr. Gunn.
I have Dr. Gunn being elected to serve your chair in an 8-4 vote.
You mean, for the record, Vice Chair, correct?
Vice Chair, thank you. Yes, Vice Chair. We look forward to the leadership under Dr. Rose and Dr. Gunn.
Well, thank you very much. I think this is going to be a group effort, regardless of the nominations and votes. I think all hands are needed here and very much appreciate the faith. I'd like to move us on to agenda item number 8, which is meeting scheduling. And my hope is that we would be pacing ourselves through this work with a balance, of course, of urgency on the one hand, because we have absolutely critical work ahead of us, as we've learned today, and we all know from our day jobs, but also understanding that there are many things going on in the lives of committee members, and we want to make sure we're taking good care of ourselves along the way. So what I might recommend, and I open this up for conversation with all of you to understand your preferences and intentions, what I hope to suggest is that Dr. Gunn and I would basically attempt a scheduling effort through a doodle poll. And I might offer from the perspective of the system administration that there's quite a lot of behind-the-scenes activity that goes into scheduling these public meetings. And so while they make it appear easy and seamless because they're very good at their jobs, one of the things we really have to take consideration of is the availability of our meeting space, which of course is governed by our Board of Regents, but as well the services of system computing services. So there are a number of scheduling complexities that we have to take into consideration and make sure we have logistical and technical support for our gatherings. So my proposal is that the chair and vice chair would be empowered to survey those needs and doodle poll the committee to establish a meeting cadence. And I'd love to take input on that.
This is General Counsel Joe Reynolds. I'd move to make a motion to authorize the chair and the vice chair of the task force to schedule meetings pursuant to a doodle poll or other reasonable means for the task force's next meeting and in future meetings.
We have a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Maria Desai-Puri, I'll second that.
Thank you. Is there any further conversation, any further input on this path forward? All right, seeing none, I will ask Deputy Ressam to call down the vote.
Dr. Kavita Bachet, Kristen DeMay, I apologize, Kristen DeMay, can you please record your vote?
Kristen DeMay for the record, yes.
Thank you. Maria Desai-Puri,
Yes, in favor.
Dr. Tabor Griswold,
Agreed.
Dr. Elizabeth Gunn, Zachary Jonigan,
Well, aye.
Dr. Allison Netsky,
Aye.
Leslie Ramirez,
Aye.
Joe Reynolds,
Yes.
Dr. Melody Rose,
Aye.
Michelle Sposito,
Yes.
Gwendolyn Thompson,
Yes.
and it is unanimous.
Thank you very much, Deputy Ressam. And now we'll move ourselves along to agenda item number 9, new business. So at this point, this is an information-only item, and I invite members of the committee to hear your input on future agenda items for inclusion and conversation as we move this effort forward. To comply with Nevada open meeting law, we need to make sure that any comments and discussion here are limited to the description and clarification of the subject matter of the item, which may include the reasons for the request, but no substantive discussion or debate may occur at this meeting on new business items. So with that, does anyone have any suggestions for future business items?
Hi, Zachary Johnny for the record. I have a question for Chief Joe Reynolds. If we go to the top here, there's a lot of things in that SB 347 that I think could be separate agenda items. Would we have to make an item of new business for each one of those like separate sentences?
Joe Reynolds, for the record. This portion of the agenda item is just for you as a task force member to essentially communicate to the chair and the other task force members of anything you'd like to see appear on a future task force agenda, and is not a part of the agenda where there's a discussion or additional questions. But I would advise that anything you would like to see placed on a specific meeting of this task force, you can raise it now and suggest that to the chair and vice chair.
Okay, thank you, Chief Joe Reynolds. All right, so I'd like to add a piece of new business to prescribe the membership, duties, and compensation of the task force. That is my first order of new business I'd like to see added on the agenda.
Thank you.
And I have a second item as well for the committee for the task force to appoint researchers to develop a climate survey on sexual misconduct.
Thank you.
And thank you. Those are my two items of new business.
Thank you. So noted. Are there additional? Oh, please, yes.
Sorry, Leslie Ramirez for the record. Something I'd like to be added on to new business would be a discussion on education materials on exactly what sexual assault and harassment is and how we would be able to communicate that to students, just because a lot of them responded with feelings of not being aware that they even were a part of these incidents. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other new business items at this time? All right, well, hearing none, then we will close that agenda item and move to agenda item number 10, public comment. So thank you all again for your comments and input during today's meeting. I will now turn to agenda item 10, which again provides an opportunity to members of the public to provide their input. As with the first public comment period for this meeting, Deputy General Counsel Tina Russum will facilitate this portion of the agenda.
Thank you, Dr. Rose. Tina Russum, Deputy General Counsel for the record. Members of the public are again invited to provide public comment to the task force. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per comment. Is there any public comment in Las Vegas? Seeing no public comment in Las Vegas, is there any public comment in Reno?
No public comment in Reno.
Thank you. And there has been public comment submitted through the portal. So I will be reading that into the record. We have 2, one that was submitted through the portal and then one that was submitted directly to me. So one moment. The first public comment is from Madison Hale. And it reads, "Hello, my name is Madison Hale, and I'm a current senator for UNLV's CSUN. A resolution I wrote with Abby Pike, the state director for the Every Voice organization, was passed through Senate recently, and I hope the provisions specified in it will be heeded by the board and lead to a fruitful conversation between us, the students, and all of you. Nevada Senate Bill 347 outlines several protections for survivors of sexual assault that have not all been made mandatory and enforceable by NSHE. And I can say for certain that CSUN and all of our constituents would like to see that rectified. Thank you for your time. And the second public comment. I apologize. Give me one moment. I pull that up. Second public comment comes from us from Veronica, more informally known as Ronnie Dare. Says, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Veronica Ronnie Dare. I am the Survey Operations Director for the Nevada Center for Surveys, Evaluation, and Statistics, which is also known as CSES or Survey Lab, and the Director of the Grant Sawyer Center for Justice Studies, or the Sawyer Center. As Patricia Anderson mentioned earlier, we have conducted the survey on behalf of WNC and GBC, and we will be launching the survey again today or tomorrow. With WNC and GBC's permission, we'd be happy to share copies of the survey with the other NSHE institutions or discuss the possibility of conducting the survey for the other NSHE institutions. And she's provided her work email address, which is veronicacad@unr.edu, if anyone would like to get in touch with her or has any questions. And that concludes public comment.
Thank you very much, Deputy Russum. And I just want to thank all of the members of the committee for this initial conversation, and I'm very much looking forward to moving this work forward with all of you. It's, I hope to be very impactful and lasting work that we do together over the course of the next months and years. But before we adjourn, I would be remiss if I didn't specifically thank some of the people that made this meeting possible. From System Computing Services, Brian Anzalone, Bentley Holmes Gold, Rick Romero, Claudio Osinaga, and Paul Gilbert Dioka. At NSHE Legal, of course, Tina Russum has put quite a lot of work into preparing us for today's meeting, and I want to thank you. Kathy Bandoni and Cindy Hunt all participated in making our efforts possible today. Also, as well, some administrative staff, Kelly Bucci and Chris Haynes, as well as one of our student workers from the front desk, David Montes. And last but certainly not least, I want to give a shout out to our amazing regents who stuck with us through 3 hours of this meeting. Regents Del Carlo and Carvalho, thank you so much for your dedication and supporting us in the work ahead. And with that, we are adjourned.